I could tell you, but it would ruin the fun, Q replied, letting the street lamp return to normal with a snap of his fingers. Instead, I think I'll challenge you. Test your ideals. See if your morality holds when you're out of your depth. The first sparks of conflict were intellectual. Superman considered whether this being was a threat, a god, or merely a trickster. He had fought monsters that destroyed planets, villains who wielded unimaginable technology, even cosmic entities like Brainiac. But Q was none of these. He existed outside conventional logic. Superman's heat vision flickered nervously as he tried to gauge Q's power, but no physical attack would suffice. Q wasn't afraid of speed, strength, or force. It didn't obey such laws. Fine, Superman said, finally. If this is a challenge, then I'll play your game. But if you harm innocent lives... I wouldn't dare, Q interrupted smoothly, floating a few inches above the rooftop. At least, not irreversibly. Chaos, moral quandaries, the thrill of impossible choices, that's what I'm here for. And you, dear Kal-El, will provide the perfect playground. Q clapped his hands, and the world seemed to warp for a heartbeat. Sidewalks curled into impossible angles, the Daily Planet Tower appeared to bend like taffy. Cars began hovering midair, pedestrians frozen in the grip of distorted physics. Superman's jaw tightened. This wasn't brute force, it was a test of intellect, will, and morality. Could he save the people if reality itself defied him? He acted instinctively. Superman used his superhearing to locate civilians in danger, then hurled them gently out of harm's way. He tried to lift twisted metal and reconstruct streets, only to have Q alter them again with a snap of his fingers. Each move Superman made was anticipated, countered, or subverted, not by strength, but by sheer cunning. Q floated closer, grinning. Now we're talking. Decisions under pressure. The sky above Metropolis shimmered with a strange, almost playful distortion, a ripple across the clouds that made even the most seasoned citizens pause. One moment, the city hummed with its usual cadence, sirens wailing, cars honking, skyscrapers gleaming under the morning sun. The next, a fissure appeared in the very fabric of reality, streaks of violet, silver, and gold twisting as if the universe itself were taking a deep, theatrical breath. And from that rift fell a figure who defied logic, physics, and common sense, Q. He landed with a casual grace on the roof of the Daily Planet, dusting invisible cosmic particles from his perfectly tailored suit. His expression held that insufferable mixture of boredom and amusement that had plagued countless Starfleet crews across countless timelines. Here, however, the rules were different. The heroes were powerful, yes, but none had encountered a being whose power was not bound by strength, speed, or even the limitations of time itself. Q's eyes scanned the city below. Metropolis, home of Superman. He already knew this universe would be more entertaining than the last. The Man of Steel had raw power, a noble heart, and a rigid moral code ripe for testing. Q smiled. Oh, this will be fun. He stretched his hands, and a nearby street lamp bent and twisted like putty in his grasp, the metal groaning under the impossible stress. The civilians below screamed and scattered, some reaching for their communicators, hoping for Superman, Batman, or even Wonder Woman to appear. And then, as if responding to an unspoken cue, the sky above parted with a low hum, and a blue and red blur streaked into view, Superman. His cape flapped in the wind, his gaze sharp and assessing. Q tipped his head, feigning a polite bow. Ah, Kal-El. Or Superman, as you mortals insist on calling you. Lovely city you've built here. And your moral compass? Deliciously rigid. Superman landed lightly, fists clenched, his eyes narrowing. Who, or what, are you? Choice has a consequence, even when you think it doesn't. Will you break, or will you hold true? Superman squared his shoulders, his eyes glowing faintly with determination. I won't let you manipulate this world to your amusement. People will survive. Always. Ah, admirable, Q said. But morality in a multiverse playground isn't black and white. Let's see how you handle something more personal. In an instant, the streets below warped into a facsimile of Superman's hometown, Smallville. Familiar faces, neighbors, friends, even Jonathan and Martha Kent, appeared in peril, the details just off enough to tug at Superman's heart. He froze, momentarily paralyzed by the illusion, before remembering Q's presence. This is a test. Keep your composure. Q floated down, hands behind his back, voice soft yet dripping with amusement. Your weakness, your compassion, is what makes you heroic. But it also makes you manipulable. How far will you go to save them? And at what cost to the greater reality? Superman's resolve solidified. He would protect lives, but he would also need to understand this new player. Q's powers weren't physical, they were abstract, philosophical, and almost impossible to quantify. Superman realized that brute strength alone wouldn't win this challenge. Strategy, empathy, and moral reasoning were just as critical. Above the city, the sky twisted again. Q laughed softly, a sound that seemed to resonate with the universe itself. You amuse me, Superman. But you'll need more than courage to survive the rest of my little game. Think of this as the warm-up. Before Superman could respond, Q vanished with a snap, leaving only a faint shimmer in the morning light. The city's twisted streets returned to normal, and the people, though shaken, were safe. Superman hovered silently, scanning for the lingering trace of Q, realizing immediately that this encounter was only the beginning. Somewhere, in the cosmic void beyond the DC universe, Q was already planning his next move. Wonder Woman, Batman, The Flash, and even the likes of Lex Luthor would soon find themselves caught in a web of moral and existential challenges unlike anything this universe had faced before. The first lesson was clear. In a universe full of heroes and villains, the introduction of a being with near omnipotent, reality-warping powers was not a threat that could be fought with fists or lasers. It required strategy, moral courage, and an understanding of power itself. And Q intended to teach that lesson with a flourish only he could muster. If you want to see more characters enter the Star Wars galaxy, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. May the Force be with you. But Superman acted immediately, catching debris mid-fall and moving citizens to safety. Every time he tried to restore order, Q countered, an unending game of anticipation versus reaction. This is absurd. Superman finally exclaimed, floating amidst the chaos. You're testing me, but why? What do you gain? Boredom, Q answered simply. I gain amusement, fascination, perspective. You see, Kal-El, I have been everywhere, met everyone, done everything. You, however, operate within constraints that fascinate me. Laws of physics, morality, empathy, such quaint concepts. Yet they define you, and therein lies your charm. I want to see how far those principles will take you. Superman clenched his fists. Then I'll show you. I'll protect this city without breaking my principles. No matter how impossible the odds. Bold, Q said, spinning the globe faster. But let's raise the stakes. Let's see if others of your so-called Justice League can match your moral fortitude. Suddenly, a ripple in space appeared next to Q, and a figure in bronze and red armor emerged, Wonder Woman. She landed softly, sword and shield in hand, eyes narrowing. What is the meaning of this, Q? She demanded. Oh, Diana, ever so noble, Q said, floating between Superman and Wonder Woman. You think your devotion to humanity is unshakable, but I intend to challenge even you. Tests are universal, you know. And who better than the champions of morality to engage in a cosmic game? Wonder Woman's sword glimmered under the warped sunlight. If you threaten this world or its people, I will stop you. Q smiled, the corners of his mouth twitching mischievously. I don't threaten. I challenge. And perhaps, in the process, I enlighten. I'm sure you'll appreciate the nuance soon enough. He clapped his hands, and the skyline dissolved. In its place rose a divine arena, ethereal and otherworldly, as if plucked from the realm of Olympus itself. Diana's eyes widened. The arena shimmered with golden light, the air fragrant with the scent of ambrosia and ozone. This is impossible. Even the gods do not. Q interrupted, floating above her with a casual air. Impossible is relative, dear Amazon. You fight for honor, for justice, for humanity. But when reality itself is your opponent, how far will those ideals stretch? The arena shifted again, walls expanding and contracting unpredictably. Diana attempted to move strategically, shield raised, sword poised. But every step she took seemed simultaneously predictable and confounding. Q's power warped her environment, bending light, sound, and even perception itself. Meanwhile, Superman studied Q's patterns. There was a method, however chaotic it appeared. Q relished challenge, but he always tested, never truly harmed. Superman realized that understanding the game was the first step to countering it. You want to see if we can adapt, he murmured to Diana. She nodded slightly, her expression thoughtful beneath her tiara. Q floated higher, arms outstretched, grin widening. Bravo, champions. But let's see what happens when time itself becomes fluid. With that, he snapped his fingers, and the arena began to spin, twisting temporal flow. Past, present, and possible futures collided into a singularity of perception. Diana saw her mother, her sisters in Themyscira, and her own battles simultaneously, all while feeling the weight of choices yet to be made. Superman, too, was affected. Memories of Krypton, his parents, and every battle he had faced flickered like holograms, overlapping with scenarios that had not occurred. Q watched with interest, gauging reactions. Were they resolute? Could they maintain composure under unimaginable strain? As both heroes struggled to maintain footing, physically, mentally, and morally. Metropolis had returned to normal, or at least the version that mortals considered normal. But Superman knew better. The city still thrummed with the aftershocks of Q's mischief, the faint, lingering dissonance in reality that no one else could perceive. To the average citizen, the streets were pristine, traffic flowing, and the sky perfectly blue. To the Man of Steel, though, the universe had been subtly altered, its fabric flexed and tested by a being whose whims made gods look cautious. Superman's thoughts were interrupted by a distant, yet piercing, hum, a vibration that seemed to originate both within and outside the city. He turned to the source, and there it was, Q, sitting cross-legged atop the daily planet globe, casually spinning it like a child with a toy, the trickster's grin wider than ever. "Good morning, Kal-El," Q said, voice carrying over the windless morning. "Or should I say, test subject." "I don't have time for games, Q," Superman replied, hovering closer, eyes narrowed. "You're endangering people, even if you think you're clever about it." Q leaned back, balancing effortlessly on the spinning globe. "Endangering? Perhaps. But also enlightening. You must learn the difference between reality and responsibility, between power and its limits. This universe, you call it DC, is teeming with heroes, gods, and lunatics. And yet none of them can truly comprehend me. Then I'll be the first," Superman said, his voice resolute. His eyes glowed red as he tested his heat vision on a nearby lamppost, only for it to bend away harmlessly under Q's manipulation. Superman realized instantly that brute force would achieve nothing. This was a battle of intellect, morality, and adaptability. Q snapped his fingers. Instantly, the cityscape folded like paper. Skyscrapers bent into impossible angles, streets rose vertically, and cars hovered midair in dissonant loops. People screamed. Q floated down between them. A fascinating response. You bend, you adapt, you endure. But now, a test of philosophy, not reflex. Choose, Preserve countless lives at the expense of one you deeply care for, or maintain personal loyalty and watch the many suffer? The question hung in the air like a blade. Both Superman and Diana froze, weighing instinct against principle. Neither option seemed morally acceptable, yet Q waited, patient and omnipotent, watching for the first sign of choice. This, Superman realized, was the heart of Q's game, not destruction, not conquest, but revelation. The test wasn't about strength. It was about decision-making, morality, and the limits of heroism when confronted with the absolute. Q's smile widened. Think carefully. There are no easy answers here. Only your courage, your intellect, and your conscience will see you through. Far below, Metropolis remained oblivious to the cosmic-level test unfolding above. To the citizens, it was just another day. To their champions, it was a challenge unlike any other, an encounter that would stretch not only their power but their very understanding of morality, reality, and the universe. And Q, hovering with casual amusement, knew that this was just the beginning. Soon, the Flash would run into temporal paradoxes, Batman would face ethical riddles of his own, and the universe itself would tremble under the subtle chaos of a being who existed beyond good, evil, and everything in between. He calculated the odds, saw the mathematical certainty of eventual failure, and simply gave up. Went into self-imposed exile. Humanity died wondering why their greatest hero abandoned them. He's not me. Isn't he? Q walked through the mirrors as if they weren't there. He made every choice you've made up until the moment he stopped. Same values. Same determination. Same hope. But hope, Superman, requires ignorance. Once you know, truly know, the futility of your efforts, how can it survive? Clark closed his eyes, then opened them with renewed focus. Because hope isn't about odds. It's about choice. Semantics. No. Superman turned to face Q directly, his blue eyes blazing with conviction. You're right that I can't save everyone. That in infinite realities, infinite versions of me fail. But that's not what hope means. He gestured at the mirrors. These aren't certainties. They're possibilities. And possibilities can be changed. Q raised an eyebrow. Even when the odds are overwhelmingly against you. Especially then. Clark stepped forward, and as he did, something changed in the reflections. The failing Superman began to move differently. The one standing over Lois's grave looked up, determination replacing grief. The one frozen in space began calculating a new trajectory. The tyrant with burning eyes hesitated, pulled back from the edge. What are you doing? Q asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. I'm making a choice. Superman's voice was steady. In every one of these realities. Every version of me is still me, still has free will, still has the power to choose differently. You showed me failure because you wanted me to despair. But all I see are people who need to remember why they started fighting in the first place. The mirrors began to glow. Clark could feel it, some connection across dimensional boundaries, some fundamental aspect of who Superman was resonating across infinite. You're not here to hurt us, Bruce continued. You're here because you're lonely. The Q continuum cast you out, or you left, and now you're looking for, what? Validation? Entertainment? Understanding? He took a step closer. You want us to prove we're worth your time because you need to prove to yourself that anything is worth your time. The silence stretched. Then Q laughed, a genuine laugh, without artifice or mockery. Oh, you're good. You're very, very good. He snapped his fingers, and suddenly Bruce was holding a file folder that definitely hadn't been there a moment before. What is this? Bruce asked. Everything I know about myself. Psychological profile. Motivations. Weaknesses, yes, even omnipotents have those, they're just more abstract. Q's smile turned melancholy. You're right, of course. The continuum didn't exile me. I exiled myself. 10 billion years of existence, detective, and I realized I'd never been surprised. Never been challenged. Never felt like anything I did actually mattered. He gestured to the League. And then I found your universe. Where a human with no powers stands beside gods. Where hope defeats certainty. Where impossible is just a word you people haven't gotten around to redefining yet. Q's expression grew serious. So yes, I want you to prove you're worth my time. Because if you're not, if even this miraculous, chaotic, beautifully broken universe is just another disappointment, then I'm out of options. Diana stepped forward, her lasso gleaming at her hip. Then let us show you freely, without tests or games. Let us prove our worth through our actions, not your manipulations. Where's the fun in that? But Q's protest was half-hearted. The fun, Diana said, her voice carrying the weight of divine authority, is in not knowing the outcome. You claim to be omniscient, but you're also claiming to be surprised by us. Which is it, Q? Variations. It wasn't power in the traditional sense. It was something Q's omnipotence couldn't quite grasp, the stubborn, irrational, absolutely human refusal to accept defeat. Impossible, Q whispered, but he was smiling. You're actually reaching across dimensional barriers through sheer force of will. That's not how. He stopped, reconsidered. Well, I suppose in this universe, that's exactly how it works. The chamber shattered. Superman stood once again in the white void, the Justice League materialized around him. Q snapped his fingers, and they were all back in the watchtower, as if they'd never left. Acceptable, Q said, though his tone suggested it was rather more than acceptable. You've passed the first test, Superman. Your hope survives contact with certainty. How quaint. He turned to Batman. Your turn, detective. No, Bruce said flatly. Q blinked. I beg your pardon. No. Batman stepped forward, his cape settling around him like a shroud. I won't participate in your test. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Q's expression shifted from amused to dangerous. You seem to be under the impression that you have a choice. I always have a choice. Bruce's voice was utterly calm. You're omnipotent. You can manipulate reality, stop time, probably erase me from existence with a thought. But you won't. Won't I? Q raised a hand, and energy crackled around his fingers. No. Because I've been watching you since you arrived. Batman pulled up a holographic display on his gauntlet. You've had 17 opportunities to cause genuine harm. The traffic light displaying ultraviolet, you could have caused accidents, but you made sure no one was in danger. The building in 2 states, you evacuated it first. The playground anomaly, you specifically chose toys that would adapt safely to the children. Q lowered his hand slowly. Do you know everything, or do you want to discover something new? Q stared at her for a long moment. Then he snapped his fingers, and the energy that had been building in the room, the tension, the barely contained power, dissipated like morning fog. You're right, he admitted. Omniscience is overrated anyway. Very well, Princess. I'll observe. I'll refrain from most of my more entertaining manipulations. I'll even try to be helpful, gods forbid. He straightened his uniform. But I'm not leaving. Consider me an embedded researcher. Studying the indigenous population. Absolutely not, Batman said. Oh, I'm sorry, did I give you the impression this was a negotiation? Q's smile returned. I'll be staying. But I'll play by your rules, mostly. No reality manipulation without permission. No temporal tampering. No turning your enemies into small woodland creatures, no matter how tempting. He paused. Unless they're about to kill someone. I draw the line at watching preventable deaths. Hal Jordan spoke up for the first time since they'd returned. And if we refuse? If we try to force you out? Q looked at him with something approaching pity. Lantern, your ring draws power from will. Admirable. But will is just directed consciousness, and consciousness is an emergent property of matter I can rewrite at the atomic level. If I wanted you gone, you'd be gone. The fact that you're all still here, still debating with me, should tell you something about my intentions. It tells us you want something from us, Superman said. Something you can't just take. Clever boy. Q snapped his fingers, and a comfortable chair materialized beneath him. He sat, crossing his legs. Fine. Here's the truth, I want to understand what makes you people keep fighting when you know, really know, that the universe is entropic, meaningless, and ultimately indifferent to your suffering. The void collapsed into structure, sharp, crystalline, infinite. Superman found himself standing alone in a chamber made of mirrors, each surface reflecting not his own image but fragments of time. Past. Present. Future. All of them showing different versions of himself, different choices, different outcomes. Welcome to the gallery of consequence, Q's voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere. I'm going to show you something your people have theorized about but never truly grasped, the infinite branching paths of causality. Every choice you've ever made, Superman, has spawned countless other realities where you chose differently. And in most of them, Q's voice dropped to a whisper. You fail. The mirrors shifted. Clark saw himself standing over Lois Lane's grave. Saw himself cradling a dead child he couldn't save in time. Saw himself with red eyes, heat vision carving through heroes who tried to stop his descent into tyranny. Saw himself frozen in space, drifting forever after miscalculating a trajectory. Saw himself as a weapon, mind-controlled, destroying the very city he'd sworn to protect. Hundreds of mirrors. Thousands. Each showing a different failure, a different tragedy, a different version of Superman who hadn't been good enough, strong enough, fast enough. In the multiverse of infinite possibility, Q continued, materializing beside him in the chamber, the versions where you succeed are statistically insignificant compared to the versions where you fail. For every reality where you save Metropolis, there are 1,000 where it burns. For every timeline where humanity thrives under your protection, there are 10,000 where they fear you, enslave you, or destroy themselves despite you. Clark stared at the reflections, his jaw tight. You're trying to break me. I'm trying to educate you. Q gestured, and a particular mirror expanded. It showed Superman, older, weathered, standing alone on a dead Earth. This version of you stopped trying. Where I come from, we solved that question by becoming indifferent ourselves. But you. He gestured broadly. You're all careening toward oblivion with smiles on your faces, and I need to know why. John spoke, his telepathic voice gentle in all their minds simultaneously. Perhaps we can show you why better than we can tell you. Q looked at the Martian with renewed interest. Telepathy. Fascinating. Your thoughts taste like loneliness and determination in equal measure. Last of your kind, aren't you? At least in the version of reality I'm observing. He stood. Very well. Show me. Teach me. Convince me that your existence has meaning beyond the heat death of your universe. His expression hardened. But know this, I've been disappointed before. And when I'm disappointed, I tend to get creative. An alarm blared through the watchtower. The holographic display activated automatically, showing multiple breaches in Earth's atmosphere. Ships, dozens of them, emerging from boom tubes. Apocalyptian design. Oh good, Q said, his tone bright with anticipation. Company. And judging by the paradimensional signatures, rather important company. He looked at Superman. This should be entertaining. Do you mind if I watch? You're going to watch anyway, Bruce said. True, but it's polite to ask. The ships began their descent toward Earth, and in the lead vessel, visible on the magnified display, sat a figure that made even the battle-hardened League members tense. Darkseid, Lord of Apocalypse, hands folded calmly as his invasion fleet approached the planet. And for the first time since arriving, Q's smile faltered. Just slightly. Just for a moment. Because even omnipotent beings recognized something genuinely dangerous when they saw it. Dismissively. 50-50 odds, really. You brought Darkseid down on Earth, Diana said, her hand moving to her lasso, and you didn't warn us? Would you have believed me? Q met her gaze. Besides, this is educational. I wanted to see how you handle existential threats. Darkseid is a perfect example, a being who's conquered thousands of worlds, enslaved billions, and genuinely believes he's bringing order to a chaotic universe. He's what I might be if I lacked imagination and had a severe personality disorder. The flagship's descent slowed. It hung over Metropolis like a storm cloud made of cruelty, its shadow falling across the city Superman had sworn to protect. This doesn't change anything, Superman said. We stop him. Like we always do. Do you? Q snapped his fingers, and suddenly they were no longer in the watchtower but standing on a rooftop in Metropolis, the flagship looming directly overhead. The League tensed, but Q simply pointed upward. Look. Really look. What do you see? Clark's vision penetrated the hull. Inside the flagship, he saw nothing. No crew. No parademons. No technology. Just empty corridors and a single throne room where Darkseid sat, utterly alone. It's a projection, John said, his telepathic senses probing the vessel. The ships, the army, none of it is physically real. Correct, Darkseid's voice boomed across the city, amplified by technology that bent sound into a weapon itself. I require no army to claim what is mine. The show of force is simply protocol. A boom tube opened on the rooftop, and Darkseid stepped through. He was massive, easily 8 feet tall, his gray skin like stone, his red eyes burning with an intelligence that had calculated the downfall of civilizations. He wore his usual armor, the Omega symbol emblazoned across his chest like a brand. But he wasn't looking at the Justice League. He was looking at Q. The boom tubes closed with thunderous cracks that resonated across 3 continents. Darkseid's flagship, a mountain of dark metal and malevolent geometry, descended through Earth's atmosphere with the inevitability of a falling guillotine blade. Smaller craft flanked it, troop carriers, weapons platforms, and vessels whose purpose was inscribed in their brutal, utilitarian design. Apocalypse, Superman said, his voice tight. He's never brought this many ships before. Perhaps he's compensating, Q offered, watching the display with the detached interest of someone observing an ant farm. Tyrannical overlords do tend toward theatrical gestures when their egos are bruised. Batman was already at the tactical console, fingers flying across holographic controls. Diana, get the Watchtower's defense grid online. Hal, contact the core, we need backup. John, coordinate with global defense networks. Clark. I know, Superman said, already moving toward the transport tubes. Engage and delay until we have a full response. Wait. Q stood, his expression shifting from amused to calculating. Before you go rushing off to your ritualized combat, you should know something interesting, Darkseid isn't here for you. Every head turned toward him. He's here for me, Q continued. Well, not me specifically, but the anomaly I represent. You see, Darkseid's entire existence is predicated on the anti-life equation, the mathematical proof that free will is an illusion and all existence can be reduced to controllable variables. The sudden appearance of an omnipotent entity from another universe? That's a variable he didn't account for. It bothers him. You knew this would happen, Batman said, his voice deadly quiet. I suspected. Q shrugged. Omnipotence is one thing. Omniscience is trickier across dimensional boundaries. I can see all possible futures within a given reality, but the exact moment a tyrannical god complex would notice my presence and take offense. He waved. You, Darkseid said, are a disruption. I get that a lot, Q replied cheerfully. Usually from beings with delusions of grandeur who think they've mastered their little corner of reality. He examined his fingernails. You must be Darkseid. I've heard so much about you. Conquered worlds, enslaved populations, searching for an equation that will prove free will doesn't exist so you can feel better about being a tyrant. Very original. The air around Darkseid shimmered with barely contained power. You mock what you do not understand. Oh, I understand perfectly. Q stepped forward, utterly unconcerned by the being who'd made Superman bleed on multiple occasions. You're afraid. Terrified, actually. Because I represent something your equation can't account for, genuine omnipotence. Not the parlor tricks you call the Omega effect. Not your ability to hurt people who are fundamentally weaker than you. Real power. The kind that makes your anti-life philosophy look like a child's temper tantrum. Superman moved between them. Q, stop. You're making this worse. Am I? Q glanced at him. He came here ready to threaten your world. I'm simply pointing out that his threats are meaningless in the face of actual divinity. He turned back to Darkseid. Tell me, Lord of Apocalypse, have you ever faced an opponent you couldn't hurt? One you couldn't kill, couldn't control, couldn't predict? Darkseid's eyes flared crimson. I have erased obstacles from existence. Obstacles. Yes. Q's smile sharpened. But never an equal. Never someone who could simply erase you with a thought and not lose a moment's sleep over it. The Omega beams fired. They were Darkseid's ultimate weapon, energy that pursued its target across dimensions, through time itself, that could kill gods and erase beings from existence. They curved through the air, reality bending around them, locked onto Q. Realities will bleed into each other. The multiverse will collapse into chaos. He's telling the truth, John said quietly, his telepathic senses confirming what he was reading from Darkseid's mind. The dimensional fabric is destabilizing. Q stared at the cracks, his usual confidence replaced by something rare, genuine uncertainty. I didn't, when I crossed over, I accounted for dimensional variance, but not for. He trailed off, then his jaw set. No. You're trying to manipulate me into leaving because I represent a threat to your plans. My plans span millennia, Darkseid said. Your presence here disrupts decades of careful calculation. But more than that, he looked at Superman, these heroes need to face their challenges on their own terms. To grow. To evolve. Your interference robs them of that. You claim to want to understand them, but you cannot understand someone you're constantly rescuing. Superman met Darkseid's gaze, then looked at Q, is he right? About the dimensional damage? Q was silent for a long moment. Then, quietly, possibly. My people never tested what happens when we cross into fundamentally incompatible realities. The laws of physics here are. He gestured vaguely. More fluid than where I'm from. It's like trying to pour water into a container made of water. The boundaries get confused. Then you have to leave, Diana said, her voice gentle but firm. Don't have to do anything, Q snapped, but there was no real heat in it. He looked at the Justice League, these impossible, admirable, frustrating mortals, and something in his expression softened. But perhaps staying isn't fair to you. Or to this universe. Before you make that decision, Batman said, pulling up a holographic display from his gauntlet, you should see this. The display showed sensor readings from the past 4 hours. The dimensional cracks weren't spreading from Q's position, they were spreading toward it. As if something was using Q's presence as a beacon, deliberately widening the fractures. Someone's using you, Bruce said. The damage is real, but it's not natural. It's being caused by deliberate manipulation of the dimensional barriers. Q's eyes narrowed. He snapped his fingers, and suddenly they were all standing in space, looking at the source wall itself. The cracks were illuminated now, and following them back to their origin revealed something none of them expected. The fractures originated from inside the universe, not from Q's entry point. Darkseid, Superman said, understanding dawning. You're breaking the dimensional barriers yourself. To prove a point, the Lord of Apocalypse said calmly. This entity's presence makes such damage possible. Without him, the barriers would hold. Therefore, he is the problem. You're holding the universe hostage, Diana said, her voice sharp with anger. Threatening to destroy everything unless Q leaves. I am demonstrating consequences. Darkseid turned to Q, you have a choice, omnipotent one. Leave now, and I will cease my manipulations. The barriers will heal. This universe will continue its natural evolution. Or stay, and watch as your curiosity destroys everything these heroes have fought to protect. Q stood very still, staring at the cracks in reality, at the manipulation, at the choice that wasn't really a choice at all. Then he started laughing. It wasn't his usual mocking laugh, or even his amused chuckle. It was the laugh of someone who just realized they'd been brilliantly outmaneuvered. Oh, you magnificent bastard, Q said, still laughing. With the certainty of entropy itself. Q caught them. Not blocked, caught. He reached out with one hand and grabbed the Omega beams as if they were physical objects, held them in his palm like writhing serpents made of red light. The energy crackled and fought against his grip, but he simply closed his fist and they vanished. Omega energy, Q mused. Interesting. It operates on a quantum level, rewriting the target's existence at the most fundamental layer of reality. Very thorough. Would probably work on most beings in this universe. He looked at Darkseid. I'm not from this universe. For the first time in recorded history, Darkseid looked uncertain. You see, Q continued, walking in a slow circle around the new god, your anti-life equation assumes that all existence operates under the same rules. That consciousness is just organized matter. That will is deterministic. That meaning is assigned, not inherent. He stopped directly in front of Darkseid. But I come from a reality where beings evolved into pure consciousness. Where we transcended matter, energy, even causality itself. Your equation doesn't apply to me because I exist outside the system you're trying to prove. Then you are an aberration, Darkseid said, his voice like grinding stone. And aberrations must be eliminated. You can certainly try. Q's expression lost all humor. But know this, if you attempt to harm these people, he gestured to the League, or this world, I will make you understand what true helplessness feels like. I will reduce your precious apocalypse to a thought experiment. I will make your new god so mortal they'll weep at the sensation of aging. I will turn your anti-life equation into a nursery rhyme and teach it to schoolchildren as a cautionary tale about tyrants who forgot their place. You can't beat me, so you're making me beat myself. Forcing me to choose between my curiosity and the safety of beings I'm trying to understand. It's elegant. Cruel, tyrannical, and fundamentally dishonest, but elegant. Then you'll leave? Darkseid asked. No, Q said, his laughter fading into a smile that was all edges. I'm going to do something I very rarely do, I'm going to trust these mortals to surprise me one more time. He snapped his fingers. The process took 17 seconds that felt like 17 hours. When it ended, Q collapsed to his knees on the impossible surface, breathing hard. The world righted itself with a sound like reality taking a deep breath, and they were standing once again on the metropolis rooftop. Well, Q said, his voice hoarse, that was unpleasant. I rate it 3 out of 10, would not recommend. He looked up at Darkseid, and his eyes were different, still powerful, still ancient, but now with a weight they hadn't carried before. Your manipulation of the dimensional barriers has been neutralized. I'm no longer a foreign body in your universe. I'm part of it now. Which means... He stood, brushing off his uniform. Your excuse for threatening Earth is gone. Darkseid studied him for a long moment. You sacrificed your unfettered omnipotence. For them. Don't read too much into it, Q said, though there was something hollow in his dismissal. I was curious. This universe interested me. Hard to study something if your mere presence destroys it. Basic scientific methodology. You're lying, Darkseid said. It wasn't an accusation, just an observation. You felt connection. Responsibility. Concepts the Q continuum abandoned eons ago. His smile returned, sharp and knowing. You've made yourself vulnerable. Before anyone could react, Darkseid moved. His speed defied his massive size, one moment standing still, the next his fist was driving toward Q's face with enough force to shatter mountains. Q raised his hand. The fist stopped. Not gently. Not easily. Q's arm trembled with effort, his feet sliding backward across the rooftop, but he held. Darkseid's blow, which had traded blows with Superman, which had cracked Doomsday's hide, was arrested by what now appeared to be a middle-aged human in a costume. I'm bound by this universe's rules now, Q said through gritted teeth, but I'm still me. Still Q. Still someone who evolved beyond physical form and chose to wear it again. He pushed, and Darkseid actually stumbled backward a step. Still someone you cannot simply crush. But no longer someone I cannot hurt, Darkseid observed. He fired his Omega beams again. This time, Q didn't catch them. He dodged, moving with speed that wasn't quite Superman fast but was far beyond human. The beams carved through the space where he'd been, and Q reappeared 20 feet away, breathing harder. Okay, Q admitted. That's new. I can actually be threatened now. Interesting sensation. Don't care for it. Superman moved between them again, but this time Darkseid made no aggressive motion. Instead, the Lord of Apocalypse simply nodded, as if confirming something he'd suspected. You have made your choice, Darkseid said. You will remain in this universe, bound by its limitations, motivated by sentiment you claim not to feel. He turned toward his boom tube. I came to eliminate a variable. Instead, I have confirmed that even omnipotence can be compromised by attachment. This information is valuable. Wait, Batman said. That's it. You threaten the planet, force Q to limit himself, confirm your theory, and just leave. Darkseid paused at the threshold of the boom tube. I am many things, detective, but inefficient is not among them. I came with a hypothesis, that even beings of infinite power could be constrained by connection to lesser beings. Q has proven my hypothesis correct. His sacrifice demonstrates that. The anti-life equation's fundamental premise, that all choices reduce to deterministic self-interest, has a flaw. His red eyes swept across the Justice League. You inspire. Explored every possibility. We became omnipotent, omniscient, eternal. And we stopped mattering. He looked at Clark. You people, you fragile, limited, absurdly mortal people, you matter to each other. You sacrifice for each other. You fight impossible odds because someone needs to. And I wanted. He trailed off, then laughed bitterly. I wanted to understand what that felt like. To be part of something instead of above it. And now? Diana asked, joining them at the roof's edge. Now I'm stuck with you. Q managed a weak smile. Anchored to your reality. Not quite mortal, I'm still functionally immortal, still can manipulate matter and energy, still have access to most of my abilities, but limited. Vulnerable. Capable of being hurt. He tested the concept like someone probing a new tooth. It's terrifying. Welcome to the human experience, Batman said, though his tone was almost sympathetic. We're terrified every day. We do it anyway. Yes, well, you're all clearly insane. Q stood, brushing himself off. But I suppose if I'm going to be stuck in this universe, I might as well make myself useful. Consider me, probation ally heroic. I'll help when needed, try not to break too many laws of physics, and attempt to resist my natural impulse to mock you constantly. We're not taking you on the team, Hal Jordan said flatly. I don't recall asking for membership, Lantern. Q examined his hand, watching energy, diminished but still present, crackle between his fingers. Besides, I work better alone. Or in very small groups. Or not at all, depending on my mood. He looked at Superman. But I meant what I said earlier. The snap echoed across dimensions. Q's power surged outward in a wave of concentrated omnipotence, and the world inverted. Not destroyed, not altered, inverted. The rooftop became the sky. Metropolis hung overhead like a chandelier. Darkseid, the Justice League, and Q himself stood on what had been empty air, gravity reorienting itself to accommodate Q's whim. But more than that, the dimensional cracks in the source wall began to heal. Not by sealing them, but by Q actively reinforcing the barriers from this side, weaving his own essence into the fabric of the DC universe like a patch over torn cloth. What are you doing? Superman asked, struggling to maintain his orientation in the inverted space. Something monumentally stupid, Q replied through gritted teeth. The effort was visible on his face, actual strain, something the omnipotent being had never shown before. I'm anchoring myself to this reality. Making myself a part of it rather than an external observer. It means I'll be bound by its rules, limited by its laws, but it also means my presence will stop causing dimensional instability. That's impossible, Darkseid said, though his tone suggested he was recalculating rapidly. You would need to fundamentally restructure your quantum signature to match this universe's baseline constants. The pain alone would. Q screamed. It wasn't a sound of fear or surprise. It was the sound of a being who existed across infinite dimensions being forcibly compressed into 3 spatial dimensions and 1 temporal. His form flickered, human, energy, nothing, everything, human again, as reality tried to decide what shape an omnipotent being should take when he volunteered to become less. The Justice League moved instinctively to help, but John held them back with a telepathic pulse. We cannot assist. This is a metamorphosis beyond our comprehension. We can only witness. Loyalty not through control, but through something else. I do not yet understand what. But I will. That's what this was about. Diana's voice carried both anger and disbelief. You threatened Earth, manipulated dimensional barriers, risked universal collapse, to test a theory. To gather data, Darkseid corrected. The universe operates on patterns. Understanding those patterns is the key to the anti-life equation. Today I learned that attachment can override survival instinct even in beings who should be incapable of genuine attachment. He looked at Q one last time. Enjoy your mortality, omnipotent one. I suspect you will find it far more burdensome than you imagine. The boom tube closed. Darkseid was gone, and the Phantom Fleet vanished with him, projections dismissed like unwanted thoughts. The Justice League stood in silence for a moment, processing what had just occurred. Then Q sat down heavily on the rooftop's edge, dangling his legs over the side like a tired office worker at the end of a long day. Well, he said to no one in particular. That could have gone better. Superman landed beside him. You limited yourself. Deliberately made yourself vulnerable. Why? I told you. Scientific curiosity. Can't study something if. Q. Superman's voice was gentle but firm. Why? Q was quiet for a long time. Below them, Metropolis continued its evening routine, people going home, lights coming on, life persisting despite the cosmic drama that had just played out overhead. He watched them, these tiny figures going about their tiny lives, and something in his expression shifted. "Where I come from," Q said quietly, "we solved every problem. Answered every question. I want to understand you. All of you. What makes you keep fighting when the universe is demonstrably indifferent to your suffering? Maybe we can show you," Clark said, extending his hand. Q stared at the offered hand for a moment, this simple gesture of trust and partnership, and something flickered across his face. Surprise. Gratitude. Fear. All the emotions he'd spent billions of years not feeling. Then he shook Superman's hand. "Don't make me regret this," Q said. "We probably will," Batman noted. "Multiple times." "Fair enough." Q released Clark's hand and stepped back. "Now if you'll excuse me, I need to find somewhere to live. Apparently, I'm a resident now. Do you people still use currency? I might need to acquire some. Unless I just..." He gestured vaguely, and a wallet materialized in his hand. "Yes, that still works." "Excellent." "Q," Diana said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who dealt with gods before, "you will check in with the League regularly. You will inform us before you exercise any large-scale reality manipulation. And you will not, under any circumstances, interfere with human free will without explicit permission." So many rules, Q sighed. "But yes, fine, whatever. I'm reformed. Practically a Boy Scout." He looked at Superman. "No offense." "None taken." John stepped forward, his red eyes studying Q with telepathic intensity. "There is something you are not telling us. About the anchoring process. About what it cost you." Q's expression went carefully neutral. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean." "You're blocking your thoughts. Aggressively. Which suggests there is something in them you do not wish us to know." "I'm entitled to privacy, Martian." "You're entitled to nothing until you earn our trust," Batman said. "What aren't you telling us?" Q looked at each of them, these heroes who'd just watched him sacrifice unfettered omnipotence, who'd seen him face down Darkseid, who'd witnessed him choose vulnerability over power. And he saw in their eyes not gratitude, but warranted suspicion. "Fine," he said. "You want the truth. When I anchored myself to this universe, I didn't just limit my power. I created a dependency." He gestured vaguely at Earth. "I'm connected to this planet now. To its timeline. If Earth is destroyed, I'm destroyed with it. If humanity goes extinct, I fade from existence. I literally tied my existence to yours." The silence was profound. "Why would you do that?" Clark asked. "Because half measures don't work. Because Darkseid was right, if I'd kept even a fragment of my external nature, the dimensional instability would have continued. Because..." Q's voice dropped. "Because for the first time in 10 billion years, I wanted to be part of something that mattered. Even if it meant I could lose everything." He snapped his fingers, and the wallet disappeared. "So congratulations, Justice League. You're now responsible for keeping an omnipotent entity alive. If I die, it'll probably be your fault. No pressure." Before any of them could respond, Q vanished, not with his usual dramatic flair, but with a simple fade, like a ghost accepting its haunting. The League stood on the rooftop, watching the spot where he'd been, each processing the implications of what they'd just learned. "He tied his existence to Earth," Hal said slowly. "That means every time we face an extinction-level threat. He faces it too," Diana finished. "He's as vulnerable as we are to planetary destruction." "Not exactly the same," Batman corrected. "He still has significant power. But the incentive structure has changed. He's no longer an outside observer. He has genuine stakes in our survival." "Is that a good thing?" Hal asked. "I don't know," Superman admitted. "But it's the reality we're dealing with now. He looked up at the stars, at the universe that had just become infinitely more complicated. We have an omnipotent entity with a savior complex, a limited understanding of human ethics, and the emotional maturity of someone who's never had real consequences for his actions. So, Diana said dryly, a teenager with godlike power. We've handled worse, John observed. Have we? Batman pulled up his holographic display, already beginning to compile files on Q, behavioral patterns, power demonstrations, potential containment strategies. Name one situation more dangerous than an omnipotent being learning mortality. None of them could. Didn't even blink. You've created entire languages around these rituals. Subcommunities. Social hierarchies based on beverage preferences. He turned to Clark. Do you know what we had in the Q continuum? Nothing. We existed in a state of pure thought. No coffee. No rituals. No comfort. Just endless, perfect knowledge and the crushing boredom that comes with it. Is that why you left? Q was quiet for a moment, running his finger around the rim of his cup. I left because I realized I'd stopped being curious. When you know everything, curiosity becomes impossible. And without curiosity. He looked up. What's the point? Before Clark could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression tightened. I have to go. Superhero emergency? Q asked with a knowing smile. Something like that. Can I come? Clark hesitated. The League had agreed, reluctantly, to let Q remain on Earth, but they'd been clear about boundaries. No unsupervised heroics. No reality manipulation without oversight. No turning villains into houseplants, no matter how much they might deserve it. Just to observe, Q said quickly, reading Clark's hesitation. I won't interfere. Scout's honor. He held up 3 fingers in what was definitely not the correct gesture. You were never a scout. Irrelevant. I'm offering to behave. That should be celebrated. Clark stood, leaving money on the table. Fine. But the moment you start manipulating reality. You'll lecture me about responsibility. Yes, I know. I've been getting that speech from various authority figures for 10 billion years. I'm well versed. Q stood as well, then paused. Should I change clothes? I feel like the Starfleet uniform might be conspicuous. Little late for that concern. Fair point. Q snapped his fingers, and his uniform shifted into civilian clothes, jeans, a button-down shirt, a jacket that looked expensive but not ostentatious. Better? You look like you're trying to blend in at a tech startup. Perfect. That's exactly the aesthetic I was attempting. The situation was in Gotham, which meant Batman was already on site when Superman arrived. The scene was surreal even by Gotham standards, an entire city block where everyone had stopped moving. Not frozen, they were breathing, blinking, aware, but unable to take any voluntary action. Hundreds of people locked in their own bodies, eyes wide with terror. Paralytic agent, Batman said without preamble as Superman landed. Airborne. Fast acting. Affects voluntary muscle control but leaves autonomic functions intact. He was already working on a blood sample from one of the victims. I've never seen anything like it. Who's responsible? Superman asked. Scarecrow. But this isn't his usual fear toxin. This is something new. Something worse, a voice echoed across the frozen crowd. Scarecrow emerged from an alley, his burlap mask somehow more unsettling in daylight. Fear is easy. I've mastered fear. But what I've created now is something more fundamental, helplessness. They're aware. They can think, feel, understand. They just can't act. Can you imagine? Being a prisoner in your own body, screaming internally while the world moves on without you? Let them go, Superman said, his voice hard. Or what? You'll stop me? Scarecrow gestured to the frozen crowd. Any sudden moves and I release the secondary agent. Turns the paralysis permanent. They'll spend the rest of their lives locked inside themselves, and it will be your fault. Batman's jaw tightened. He was already calculating angles, trajectories, possible interventions. But Scarecrow had planned well. He was surrounded by too many hostages. Any offensive action risked triggering the secondary release. This is why you do it, Q said suddenly. This is why you keep trying despite the odds. Clark glanced at him. What? You asked why you fight when the universe is indifferent. This is why. Q gestured to the frozen people. Because they can't. Because someone has to. Because the alternative is letting Scarecrow win, and that's not acceptable. He looked at Superman, really looked at him. Even if you fail. Even if you can't save everyone. You try because not trying is unthinkable. Q, I can't. I know. You can't ask me to interfere. Against the rules. Against your principles. Q's smile was sad. But what if I interfered without being asked? Q, don't. Q snapped his fingers. Nothing visible happened. No flash of light, no dramatic transformation. Scarecrow was still standing there, the crowd still frozen. But Batman's gauntlet suddenly beeped with new data, a complete molecular analysis of the paralytic agent appearing in his display as if it had been there all along. How did you? Batman started. I didn't manipulate reality, Q said quickly. I just accelerated your analysis. Gave your computer the processing speed it needed to complete the breakdown in milliseconds instead of hours. No direct interference. Just a boost to existing technology. It was a technicality. A loophole. And they all knew it. But Batman didn't hesitate. His fingers flew across the interface, synthesizing a counteragent from the chemical composition now displayed before him. 3 minutes. I need 3 minutes to produce enough for dispersal. Scarecrow, realizing something had changed, reached for the secondary release mechanism. Superman moved, not to attack, but to interpose himself. Q, standing beside Superman in his civilian disguise, watched the scene with intense focus. He could feel the edges of his power, diminished but present, pushing against his self-imposed restraints. One snap of his fingers and this would be over. Scarecrow would be harmless. The victims would be free. It would be easy. But he'd promised not to interfere. This is your test, isn't it? Q said quietly. He's created a scenario where your power is irrelevant. Where even Superman's speed and strength can't help without making things worse. We'll find a way, Clark said. How? Be specific. Because from where I'm standing, your options are, let him go and hope he releases the hostages, or attack and guarantee their permanent imprisonment. Q's voice was frustratingly rational. These are the moral calculus problems you face every day. The no-win scenarios. There's always a way, Batman said, his fingers still working across his gauntlet's interface. The paralytic agent has to have a dispersal mechanism. If I can identify it, trace it back. You don't have time, Scarecrow interrupted. In 15 minutes, the primary agent becomes permanent anyway. 15 minutes and hundreds of people become living statues. Unless. He tilted his head. Unless the great Superman admits he's powerless. Kneels. Admits to all these people that their hero can't save them. The trap was obvious. Scarecrow would either win by keeping the hostages imprisoned or by breaking Superman's image in the eyes of the people he protected. Possibly both. Q could feel Superman's tension. See Batman's calculations becoming increasingly desperate. And in the frozen crowd, he could sense, even with his diminished perception, the overwhelming terror of people unable to even beg for help. Cheapens the victory. Believe me, the continuum made that argument for millennia whenever I wanted to help lesser species. His voice softened. But watching you suffocate yourself to save others, watching Batman calculate impossible odds, watching all these people face permanent imprisonment because one man wanted to prove a point about fear. I couldn't just stand there. Call it weakness. Call it sentiment. Call it whatever you want. But I couldn't watch you lose when I had the power to help. Superman was quiet for a long moment. Around them, reunited families embraced. People thanked Batman as he returned with Scarecrow in custody. Emergency responders arrived to treat the shaken victims. Life continued, saved by heroic action and questionable intervention in equal measure. "You're going to have to tell the League," Clark finally said. "I know. They're not going to be happy. I know that too." Q watched a mother hug her daughter, both crying with relief. "But I'd do it again." "That's probably the problem, isn't it? I'm supposed to let you fail sometimes. Let the universe play out naturally. But I've spent billions of years not caring about consequences, and now that I do care." He shook his head. "I don't know how to care the right amount." "Join the club," Superman said with a tired smile. "We all struggle with that." "Really? Every day? How much to intervene? When to step back? Whether saving someone today creates a worse problem tomorrow." Clark put a hand on Q's shoulder. "Being a hero isn't about having power. It's about knowing when. Cheapens the victory. Believe me, the continuum made that argument for millennia whenever I wanted to help lesser species." His voice softened. "But watching you suffocate yourself to save others, watching Batman calculate impossible odds, watching all these people face permanent imprisonment because one man wanted to prove a point about fear. I couldn't just stand there. Call it weakness. Call it sentiment. Call it whatever you want. But I couldn't watch you lose when I had the power to help." Superman was quiet for a long moment. Around them, reunited families embraced. People thanked Batman as he returned with Scarecrow in custody. Emergency responders arrived to treat the shaken victims. Life continued, saved by heroic action and questionable intervention in equal measure. "You're going to have to tell the League," Clark finally said. "I know. They're not going to be happy. I know that too." Q watched a mother hug her daughter, both crying with relief. "But I'd do it again. That's probably the problem, isn't it? I'm supposed to let you fail sometimes. Let the universe play out naturally. But I've spent billions of years not caring about consequences, and now that I do care." He shook his head. "I don't know how to care the right amount." "Join the club," Superman said with a tired smile. "We all struggle with that." "Really? Every day? How much to intervene? When to step back? Whether saving someone today creates a worse problem tomorrow." Clark put a hand on Q's shoulder. "Being a hero isn't about having power. It's about knowing when to use it and when not to. And that's the hardest lesson to learn. I'm beginning to understand that." Q looked at his hands, mortal hands now, capable of being hurt, tied to this planet's fate. In the continuum, we never had to make these choices. We were above consequences. But here. He gestured to the saved crowd. "Here, every choice matters. Every action ripples. And I'm terrified I'm going to make the wrong call and doom someone because I was too proud or too afraid or too human." Clark finished. Q laughed bitterly. "Is that what this feeling is? Humanity? It's awful. I hate it. How do you people live like this? We don't have a choice." "I did," Q said quietly. "I chose this. Anchored myself to your reality, made myself vulnerable, accepted mortality, well, conditional mortality. And now I'm stuck feeling things I spent 10 billion years successfully ignoring. Before Superman could respond, Batman's voice came through Clark's communicator. Superman. Watchtower. Now. And bring Q. We need to talk about boundaries. Q grimaced. I'm in trouble, aren't I? Probably. Worth it though. Q looked at the saved crowd one more time, at the lives that would continue because he bent the rules. Completely worth it. As they lifted off, Superman flying, Q levitating alongside him with his diminished but still formidable powers, Q couldn't help but smile. For the first time in his long existence, he'd done something that mattered not because it was interesting or amusing, but because it was right. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. He was beginning to understand, the point of everything. First time. Barry Allen's voice was surprisingly hard. From where I'm sitting, you're exactly that. Billions of years old chronologically, but you've never had to face consequences for your actions. Never had to live with the results of a bad call. You're learning accountability in real time, and that makes you dangerous. Q's expression darkened. I've lived longer than your species has existed. I've witnessed civilizations rise and fall. I've seen the birth and death of stars. You dare lecture me about maturity? Yes, Barry said simply. Because age doesn't equal wisdom. Time doesn't equal growth. You can exist for eternity and never learn anything if you're never challenged. He stood, walking closer to Q. I've made mistakes. Broken the timeline trying to save people I loved. Created alternate realities where everything went wrong because I thought I knew better. And you know what I learned? That having the power to fix everything doesn't mean you should. The room was silent. Q stared at Flash, this mortal who moved at impossible speeds, who'd apparently made his own catastrophic attempts to play God, and something shifted in his expression. What happened? Q asked quietly. When you broke the timeline. Barry's jaw tightened. I tried to save my mother. Went back in time, prevented her murder. Created a world where she lived. Where I had the childhood I always wanted. He paused. And in doing so, I doomed millions. Changed the lives of everyone I cared about. Bruce wasn't Batman. Clark's ship never made it to Earth. Diana and Arthur were at war. The entire world was on the brink of destruction because I couldn't accept one death. But you had the power to fix it, Q said. Surely you. I did fix it. I went back again, let her die, restored the timeline. Barry's voice was raw. But some things didn't reset perfectly. The Watchtower's briefing room had the atmosphere of a courtroom. The Justice League sat in a semicircle, Batman, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, Flash, Martian Manhunter, Aquaman, and Cyborg, all watching Q with expressions ranging from disapproval to outright hostility. Superman stood beside Q, looking like a lawyer who knew his client was guilty but was obligated to provide defense anyway. Let me understand this correctly, Batman said, his voice carrying the measured tone of someone maintaining professional calm through sheer willpower. You were explicitly instructed not to interfere with active situations. You accompanied Superman as an observer. And within 3 hours, you had directly manipulated technology to provide me with information that altered the outcome of a hostage scenario. Well, when you phrase it like that, it sounds bad, Q said. It is bad, Hal Jordan snapped. You broke the one rule we gave you on day 3 of being here. That's got to be some kind of record. Actually, I broke multiple rules in the continuum within the first century of existence, so my track record is. Q, Diana interrupted, her voice firm but not unkind. This is serious. We need to trust that when you say you won't interfere, you won't interfere. If we can't trust you, we can't work with you. I understand that. I do. Q leaned forward. But explain to me how I was supposed to watch hundreds of people face permanent neural imprisonment when I could prevent it with minimal intervention. Tell me the ethical framework that makes that the correct choice. It's not about ethics, Batman said. It's about precedent. Today you manipulated technology because lives were at stake. Tomorrow it's manipulating a criminal's thoughts because you don't want to see Superman get hurt. Next week it's rewriting someone's timeline because you think their life would be better. Where does it end? It ends where I say it ends. I'm not some impulsive child, aren't you? Flash spoke up for. Q stopped pacing. I didn't think. That's the problem, Batman interrupted. You didn't think. You felt. Emotion without consideration is just as dangerous as power without restraint. He pulled up a holographic display. The Scarecrow incident had 17 possible resolution paths. I was working through them when you provided the chemical analysis. Maybe the path I was on would have worked. Maybe it wouldn't. We'll never know because you removed the uncertainty. I saved time. You removed agency. Batman's voice cut like a knife. Mine. Superman's. Even Scarecrow's. You decided you knew best and acted accordingly. That's not heroism. That's tyranny with good intentions. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Q felt something he hadn't experienced in eons, shame. Deep, genuine shame that made him want to vanish back to the continuum where he never had to face judgment from beings he'd once considered beneath notice. I didn't mean to, he stopped. Started again. I saw people suffering. I had the power to help. I thought that was enough. It's not, Diana said, but her voice was softer now. Power without wisdom is just destruction waiting to happen. And wisdom requires understanding context, accepting limitations, and sometimes, often, living with imperfect outcomes. So what should I have done? Q turned to face them, and for the first time since arriving in this universe, he looked genuinely lost. Watched Superman suffocate. Watched Batman fail. Stood there with godlike power while people suffered. Yes, Batman said simply. That's monstrous. That's trust. Superman put a hand on Q's shoulder. Trust that we can handle our own problems. Trust that failure sometimes teaches us more than success. Trust that we've been doing this long enough to know what we're capable of. Q shook his head. I can't. I don't know how to do that. Where I come from, standing by while you have the power to help is the height of immorality. And where you come from, Aquaman spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the weight of someone who ruled an entire kingdom. Your interventions don't have consequences for you. You could play God with civilizations and simply leave when you got bored. But you've anchored yourself here. You're part of this reality now. Which means your actions have consequences you can't escape. The door to the briefing room opened. John had clearly sensed the arrival telepathically, because none of the League seemed surprised when three figures entered, Dr. Fate, Zatanna, and someone Q didn't recognize, a woman with dark skin and silver hair, wearing robes that seemed to shift between dimensions. Phantom stranger, Diana said, standing. We weren't expecting. The magical community has taken notice, the silver-haired woman said, her voice resonating with harmonics that suggested she spoke from multiple planes simultaneously. An entity of Q's nature, bound to Earth's reality, represents a significant disruption to the balance. I'm standing right here, Q said. If you have concerns, address them to me. Dr. Fate's helmet turned toward him, and when he spoke, it was with the combined voice of Nabu and his host. You have made yourself part of the natural order. The magical forces that govern this reality now recognize you as a fixed point. If you die, the consequences will cascade across dimensional boundaries. I'm aware, Q said. I knew the risks when I anchored myself. Become fully human, and let the paradox resolve harmlessly. And the other option? Learn perfect control, Dr. Fate said. Never exercise your power unless absolutely necessary. Accept the limitations you've imposed on yourself and truly live within them. Every time you manipulate reality, you accelerate the timeline toward catastrophic resolution. So I become mortal, or I become a monk, Q summarized. Those are my choices. Those are the only choices that don't end with Earth's destruction, Phantom Stranger confirmed. Q walked to the watchtower's observation window, staring down at Earth, the planet he'd bound himself to, the world he'd grown to care about despite himself. Billions of people down there, living their fragile lives, completely unaware that an omnipotent being's midlife crisis was threatening their existence. I'm going to need time to think about this, he said finally. You don't have time, Batman said. Every moment you exist in this state, you're risking. I said I need time. Q's voice carried an edge of his old omnipotent authority. I've existed for 10 billion years. I've made exactly one impulsive decision in all that time, coming to this universe. I'm not going to make another one now. He turned to face them. I'll give you my answer within 24 hours. Until then, I won't use my powers. Not even the smallest manipulation. I'll be as human as I know how to be. His smile was bitter. Should be an educational experience. Q, Superman started. 24 hours, Clark. Q's expression softened. You asked why I do what I do. Why I intervene today. It's because for the first time in my existence, I felt like I mattered. Like my choices had weight. Like I was part of something bigger than my own entertainment. He gestured to the League. You people face impossible choices every day. Life and death. Hope and despair. You do it without godlike power, without certainty, without the safety net of omnipotence. And you keep trying anyway. He walked toward the transport tubes. I need to decide if I'm brave enough to do the same. Brave enough to be truly mortal. Or if I'm too much of a coward to let go of the power that's defined me for longer than your species has existed. The transport tube activated, and Q vanished. The briefing room remained silent for a long moment after his departure. Finally, Barry spoke. He's going to choose mortality, isn't he? I don't know, Superman said, still staring at the transport tube. But whatever he chooses, it's going to change everything. For him or for us? Hal asked. Yes, Batman said simply. And on Earth below, in a small apartment Q had materialized for himself 3 days ago, an omnipotent being sat in the dark and tried to decide if he was ready to become something he'd spent 10 billion years considering beneath him, human. Q spent his first 12 hours as a voluntary mortal doing absolutely nothing. He sat in his apartment, a modest 2-bedroom in Metropolis that he'd conjured from nothing and then felt guilty about, and simply existed. No reality manipulation. No temporal observation. No reaching out with omniscient awareness to see what was happening across the city, the planet, the universe. Just sitting. Breathing. Being. It was excruciating. Every few minutes, he'd catch himself starting to use his powers reflexively. The apartment was too warm, his hand would twitch, ready to snap the temperature to perfect comfort before he stopped himself. He was hungry, genuinely hungry for the first time in eons, and his first instinct was to materialize food rather than acquire it through normal means. The sunset outside his window was beautiful, and he wanted to slow it down, make it last, paint the sky with colors that didn't exist in nature. He did none of those things. Instead, he sat in his too warm apartment, feeling his stomach growl, watching the sunset fade at its natural pace, and tried to understand what it meant to be limited. Around hour 13, someone knocked on his door. Q wasn't expecting visitors. The Justice League knew where he was. John could locate him telepathically anywhere on the planet, but they'd agreed to give him space to make his decision. So who would be? He opened the door and found Death standing in his hallway. Not the abstract concept. Not a metaphor. Death herself, one of the endless, wearing the form of a young woman in casual clothes with an ankh pendant around her neck. She smiled at him, warm, genuine, somehow sad and joyful simultaneously. "Hello, Q," she said. "Mind if I come in?" Q stared at her for a long moment. He'd encountered death before, witnessed it, caused it on occasion, even studied it as a phenomenon. But death as an entity, as a being with agency and purpose? That was uniquely part of this universe's metaphysics. He stepped aside. Of course. Death walked into the apartment, looking around with casual interest. Nice place. A bit sparse, but that makes sense. You've only been human for about 14 hours now. She sat on his couch without invitation, utterly comfortable. How's it going? I haven't decided yet, Q said, still standing by the door. Whether to become fully mortal or, the other option. I know. Death patted the couch beside her. Sit down, Q. You're making me nervous, and that's hard to do. Q sat, maintaining a careful distance. Being near death, even friendly, casual death, awakened instincts he hadn't known he possessed. Fight or flight responses, survival mechanisms, the animal awareness of being near something that could end him. You can feel it, can't you? Death asked. Your mortality. It's been theoretical until now, but having me here makes it real. Yes, Q admitted. It's unpleasant. Most people feel that way. Death pulled her feet up onto the couch, getting comfortable. But I'm not here to scare you. I'm here because you're standing at a crossroads, and I thought you might appreciate some perspective from someone who's seen every choice every being has ever made about living and dying. You've come to convince me to choose mortality. I've come to have a conversation. Death's smile was gentle. What you choose is entirely up to you. But I've been watching you since you arrived in this universe, and I thought you might have questions. Q was quiet for a moment, then, if I become fully mortal, if I let go of my power completely, will I still be me? That's the question, isn't it? Death looked out the window at the metropolis skyline. You've defined yourself by your omnipotence for so long that you can't imagine being Q without it. But here's what I've learned from watching trillions of lives: people aren't their power. They're their choices. I'm not telling you what to choose, Death said firmly. But I am telling you that mortality isn't a weakness. It's not a punishment or a lesser state of being. It's just different. Humans die, yes. But they also live in ways the continuum never could. They love, fear, hope, despair. They feel with an intensity that immortals can never match because their time is limited. Every moment matters because there aren't infinite moments. She stood, walking to the window. You're afraid that becoming mortal means becoming less. But what if it means becoming more? More present. More connected. More real. More vulnerable, Q said quietly. Yes, Death agreed. That too. Vulnerability is terrifying. It's also the only way to genuinely connect with anyone. She turned back to him. The Justice League doesn't trust you yet because you're not truly vulnerable. You're playing at limitation while keeping your power in reserve. But if you choose mortality, real, complete mortality, you'll finally be standing on the same ground as them. Subject to the same risks. Living with the same uncertainty. And if I die? Q asked. If I become mortal and something kills me? What happens then? Death's smile was mysterious. Then I'll come for you, like I come for everyone. And we'll take a walk together, and you'll find out what comes next. I promise you, it won't be boring. That's not particularly comforting. It wasn't meant to be. Death moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. The magical community is right that you're causing paradoxes. But they're wrong about the timeline. It's not months or years. Based on what I can see, you have about 72 hours before the paradox resolves itself catastrophically. So whatever you decide, decide soon. 72 hours. Philosophical platitudes won't. I'm not being philosophical, Death interrupted. I'm being literal. I've met gods who lost their divinity and discovered they were cruel, petty beings without their power to hide behind. I've met mortals who achieved godhood and became monsters because they had no character to anchor them. Power doesn't make you who you are. How you use it, or don't use it, does. Q leaned back, processing. The Justice League thinks I'm dangerous. That I'm a child with a loaded weapon, trying to do good but causing harm through ignorance. They're not wrong, Death said. But they're also not entirely right. You are learning. Growing. That's more than most omnipotent beings ever do. She turned to face him directly. Do you know why the Q Continuum exiled you? Not the official reason, but the real one. They said I was too interested in lesser beings. That I was anthropomorphizing them, seeing patterns where there were none. They were afraid you were becoming mortal, Death said. Not physically. Emotionally. You were developing attachment, empathy, the capacity to be hurt by others' pain. The Continuum saw that as weakness. As corruption of what it means to be Q. Q stared at her. How do you know this? Because I was there when they made the decision. Not physically, the Continuum exists outside my usual domain, but I felt it. The moment they chose to cast you out. And do you know what I felt from them? Death's expression grew sad. Envy. They were jealous that you could still feel something. That you could still be surprised, hurt, changed by experience. They've been dead inside for so long they've forgotten what it means to be alive. So I should choose mortality. Embrace limitation. Become like them. Q gestured toward the window, toward the teeming millions of Metropolis. That I loved her enough to risk everything. Even though you failed. I didn't fail, Barry said firmly. I made a choice that had consequences. That's not the same as failure. Failure would have been doing nothing because I was afraid of the outcome. He leaned forward. You're afraid of becoming mortal because you think it means being helpless. Being at the mercy of forces beyond your control. But that's just life, Q. Everyone lives with that. And they're not helpless, they're human. They find strength in limitation. Purpose in mortality. Connection in vulnerability. The League sent you to convince me. The League doesn't know I'm here, Barry admitted. I came because I wanted to tell you something nobody else will. Whatever you choose, you're not alone. If you choose mortality, you'll have people who understand what that means. Who'll help you adjust. Who'll catch you when you fall. He smiled. And you will fall. A lot. Being human means failing constantly. But it also means having people who'll help you back up. Before Q could respond, an explosion rocked the street outside. Both men were on their feet instantly. Through the window, they could see smoke rising from a building 3 blocks away. People were screaming, running. And above the chaos, a figure floated, someone in high-tech armor, energy crackling around their gauntlets. Metallo, Barry said grimly. Superman's rogues gallery must have heard he's in the watchtower. Q's hands clenched. He could feel his power, right there beneath the surface. One snap and Metallo. That I loved her enough to risk everything. Even though you failed. I didn't fail, Barry said firmly. I made a choice that had consequences. That's not the same as failure. Failure would have been doing nothing because I was afraid of the outcome. He leaned forward. You're afraid of becoming mortal because you think it means being helpless. Being at the mercy of forces beyond your control. But that's just life, Q. Everyone lives with that. And they're not helpless, they're human. They find strength in limitation. Purpose in mortality. Connection in vulnerability. The League sent you to convince me. The League doesn't know I'm here, Barry admitted. I came because I wanted to tell you something nobody else will. Whatever you choose, you're not alone. If you choose mortality, you'll have people who understand what that means. Who'll help you adjust. Who'll catch you when you fall? He smiled. And you will fall. A lot. Being human means failing constantly. But it also means having people who'll help you back up. Before Q could respond, an explosion rocked the street outside. Both men were on their feet instantly. Through the window, they could see smoke rising from a building 3 blocks away. People were screaming, running. And above the chaos, a figure floated, someone in high-tech armor, energy crackling around their gauntlets. Metallo, Barry said grimly. Superman's rogues gallery must have heard he's in the watchtower. Q's hands clenched. He could feel his power, right there beneath the surface. One snap and Metallo. Moment, then nodded. Stay behind me. Don't do anything stupid. Can't promise that, Q said, following him out the door. And as they ran toward the danger, one of them supernaturally fast, the other merely determined, Q felt something he hadn't expected, excitement. Not the detached amusement of watching lesser beings struggle. Real excitement. The kind that came from not knowing the outcome. From facing genuine risk. The kind that came from finally, truly being alive. 2 seconds. The water surrounded Metallo's kryptonite heart. Refracted the radiation. Scattered the wavelength. 1 second. The bombs didn't detonate. Q collapsed against the broken hydrant, soaking wet, breathing hard. His completely normal, thoroughly mortal lungs struggled to catch up with the exertion. His hands were shaking. His clothes were ruined. He'd never felt better in his life. You beautiful, brilliant idiot. Barry was suddenly beside him, grinning. That was, how did you even think of that? Lucky guess, Q managed. Is everyone safe? Bomb squads already moving in to disarm the devices now that they're inactive. Flash helped Q to his feet. You did that without powers. Just human ingenuity and complete disregard for your own safety. Is that what heroism feels like? Q asked. Because I think I'm having a cardiac event. That's adrenaline. You'll get used to it. A shadow fell over them. Both men looked up to see Superman descending from the sky, concern etched on his face. Behind him, the rest of the Justice League was arriving, Batman in the Batmobile, Wonder Woman flying in, Green Lantern creating a construct platform for the others. We heard the emergency broadcast, Superman said, landing beside them. Q, are you? He stopped, seeing Q's condition. Soaking wet, exhausted, clearly having been in the thick of the crisis. What did you do? What you do, Q said simply. I helped. Without powers. Without shortcuts. Just, thinking. Choosing. Acting. He looked at his hands, still shaking, still thoroughly human. And it was the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced. I could have died. Really died. And I did it anyway. Batman was already analyzing the scene, reviewing footage from nearby security cameras. He paused on one frame, Q standing up from behind the car, completely exposed to Metallo's. Metallo was systematically dismantling downtown Metropolis. The cyborg villain, a human brain encased in a robotic body powered by kryptonite, stood atop a transit station, firing energy blasts at fleeing civilians with methodical precision. He wasn't trying to kill them, Q realized. He was hurting them. Driving them toward a central location like cattle being corralled for slaughter. He's setting a trap, Q said as he and Barry ducked behind an overturned car. For Superman. Yeah, I got that. Flash was already calculating angles, trajectories, rescue priorities. I can evacuate the civilians, but the moment I move at speed, he'll trigger whatever he's planning. These types always have a failsafe. So we need to know what the trap is before we spring it. We need Superman, Barry corrected. He'd see through the walls, find the explosives or whatever Metallo's planted. He's in the watchtower, Q interrupted. Even if you called him now, it would take minutes for him to arrive. Those people don't have minutes. He peered over the car. Metallo was scanning the crowd, his kryptonite heart glowing green through his chassis. I could stop this. Right now. One snap of my fingers. But you won't, Barry said. It wasn't a question. But I won't. Q felt the words like a physical weight. Because I made a promise. Because the League is right that I need to learn restraint. Because, he stopped. Because if I can't face one crisis without using godlike power, what's the point of pretending I can be anything other than what I've always been? A woman screamed as part of the transit station's roof collapsed. Metallo laughed, a distorted, mechanical sound that barely resembled human emotion. Metropolis, the cyborg called out. Where is your hero? Where is the alien who claims to protect you? He fired another blast, this one deliberately missing but close enough to terrify. I've calculated his response time. Accounted for his hearing range. Even now, he hears you. It was horrible. It was exhilarating. Found them. Flash's voice crackled through the emergency frequency Q could hear from nearby police radios. 4 devices, but they're shielded. I can't vibrate through the casing, and they're on a deadman switch. If I move them, they detonate. If I leave them, they detonate in 8 seconds, Metallo finished. You can't save everyone, Flash. You have to choose. The people still in the building, or the people in the blast radius outside. Save one group, lose the other. That's the hero's dilemma, isn't it? The impossible choice Superman faces every day. Q's mind raced. He couldn't use his powers. Couldn't manipulate reality, stop time, disarm the bombs with a thought. But he could still think. Could still use the intelligence that had made him curious about lesser beings in the first place. The kryptonite, Q said, loud enough for Barry to hear. It's not just his heart, it's his power source. The bombs are probably using kryptonite radiation as a trigger. If we disrupt the frequency. 5 seconds, Metallo announced gleefully. Q stood up from behind the car. Metallo immediately targeted him, but Q was already moving, not fast, not with superhuman speed, just human desperation, toward the nearest fire hydrant. He grabbed a discarded crowbar from the wreckage and swung it at the hydrant's cap. Water exploded upward in a geyser. Flash. Channel the water toward Metallo. Water disrupts radiation wavelengths. If we can saturate the area, it might interfere with the trigger signal. It was a desperate theory. Probably wrong. Almost certainly insufficient. But Barry didn't hesitate. He ran a circuit around the geyser, using his speed to create a vortex that pulled the water into a swirling column, then directed it toward Metallo's position. The water hit the cyborg like a pressurized wave, drenching him, flooding the transit station plaza. Fire so Flash could work. Risked his life for the plan. I wasn't thinking about it that way, Q admitted. I was just doing what needed to be done. Is that what you people feel? This constant awareness that you might die but doing it anyway because the alternative is unacceptable? Every single day, Diana said, and there was something like pride in her voice. Metallo, still drenched and sparking, tried to move. Superman was there instantly, his hand on the cyborg's shoulder with just enough pressure to keep him immobile. It's over, Metallo, Clark said. You were late, the cyborg spat. I planned for you. Calculated every variable. And yet some random civilian disrupted everything with water and a crowbar. Not a random civilian, Superman said, glancing at Q with a slight smile. Someone learning what it means to be a hero. STR Labs arrived to contain Metallo. The police began securing the scene. The civilians who'd been evacuated started returning, checking on each other, embracing loved ones. Normal human reactions to crisis averted. Q watched them, these fragile beings who faced death and chose to continue anyway. And he finally understood. "I've made my decision," he said. The League gathered around him. Batman pulled up a holographic display from his gauntlet, showing the dimensional paradox indicators. They were spiking. Phantom Stranger's 72-hour estimate had been optimistic. Based on current readings, Q had maybe 30 hours left before catastrophic resolution. "I'm going to become mortal," Q said. "Fully. Completely. No powers. No safety net. Just Q, whoever that is without omnipotence." "You're sure?" Superman asked. "No," Q admitted. "I'm terrified. The thought of losing everything I've been for 10 billion years. It's incomprehensible. But..." He gestured to the scene around them, the saved civilians. Gods with nothing but preparation and will. About Flash breaking reality out of love and learning from the consequences. About Wonder Woman's divine compassion. About this entire universe that operated on impossible principles and made them work through sheer determination. "I'm ready," Q said. The magic activated. Q screamed. It felt like every atom of his being was being rewritten, and in a sense, it was. His quantum structure, designed to exist across infinite dimensions, was being compressed, simplified, made compatible with three-dimensional space and linear time. His consciousness, vast enough to observe entire galaxies simultaneously, was being contained within a single biological brain with limited processing capacity. His power, the fundamental ability to manipulate reality itself, was being stripped away layer by layer, replaced with nothing. With ordinary human limitation. It hurt beyond description. Superman caught him as he collapsed. The process took 90 seconds that felt like 90 years. When it ended, Q lay gasping in Clark's arms, his body temperature spiking and dropping erratically as his new physiology learned how to regulate itself. "Is it done?" Q managed to ask. Dr. Fate scanned him with mystical senses. "Yes. You are fully human now. Mortal lifespan. Vulnerable to all standard biological threats. No reality manipulation abilities whatsoever." He paused. "You will age. Sicken. Eventually die." "How long?" Q asked. "Barring accident or illness. Perhaps 80 years. Maybe 90 if you're lucky." Q started laughing. It hurt, his newly mortal body was still adjusting, but he couldn't stop. 80 years. I've existed for 10 billion and now I have 80. The laughter turned into something between a sob and a giggle. That's nothing. That's a blink. That's screaming. And yet he's not here. What does that tell you about Superman's priorities? It tells me you're about to have a very bad day, Flash said, and he was gone. The Scarlet Speedster became a blur of motion, evacuating civilians from Metallo's line of fire faster than the cyborg could track. But Q had been right, the moment Barry moved at super speed, Metallo's hand moved to a device at his belt. Failsafe triggered, the cyborg announced. 30 seconds until detonation. Q looked around frantically. Detonation of what? Where were the bombs? He couldn't see them, couldn't sense them with his diminished awareness. For the first time in his existence, he was operating with the same limited perception as every other being in this crisis. It was terrifying. It was clarifying. Think, he told himself. You've observed thousands of crises. What do tactical minds do when they can't see the threat? Batman. Batman would look for patterns. For logic in the chaos. Q studied Metallo's position. The transit station was a hub, multiple lines converging, hundreds of people passing through daily. If you wanted maximum casualties, you'd target the support structures. Bring the whole building down at once. The pillars, Q said aloud, then louder, Flash. The support pillars. The bombs are in the structural supports. Barry heard him. Super speed came with enhanced perception, and changed trajectory mid-run. He phased through the transit station's walls, searching for the devices Q had theorized about. 15 seconds. Metallo's mechanical eyes locked onto Q. You're the anomaly. The dimensional irregularity the underground's been buzzing about. He fired an energy blast directly at Q's position. Q dove behind the car, feeling the heat as the blast vaporized where he'd been standing. His heart was pounding, actual adrenaline, actual fear response, actual awareness that he could die from the next shot. The averted disaster, the evidence of what mortals could accomplish through courage and cooperation. But I finally understand what you tried to tell me. Power isn't what makes you matter. Choices are. And I want to make choices that have weight. Consequences. Meaning. The process will be painful, Dr. Fate said, materializing nearby with Zatanna and Phantom Stranger. Stripping away omnipotence, fully integrating you into Earth's reality, it will feel like dying. I know. Q's smile was shaky but genuine. Death already gave me the preview. But she also promised it would be interesting. And I'm nothing if not curious about what comes next. When do you want to do this? Zatanna asked. Q looked at the sunset, his second natural sunset since arriving in this universe, and he'd watched both of them without manipulation. Now. Before I lose my nerve. Before the paradox resolves itself and takes Earth with it. Here. Barry asked. In the middle of downtown Metropolis. Why not? Q spread his arms. If I'm going to become human, I might as well do it surrounded by the humanity that inspired the choice. The magical practitioners formed a triangle around Q. Dr. Fate began chanting in languages that predated human speech. Zatanna's backwards magic wove patterns in the air. Phantom Stranger simply placed her hand over Q's heart, or where a heart would be in a fully mortal being. This is your last chance to change your mind, Phantom Stranger said softly. Once we begin, there's no reversal. You will be mortal. Permanent. Final. Q thought about the Q continuum. About 10 billion years of existence without growth. About the crushing boredom of omniscience and the desperate loneliness of beings who'd forgotten how to care. Then he thought about Superman suffocating himself to save others. About Batman facing. That's life, Superman said gently. Welcome to it. Q lay there for a moment longer, feeling things he'd never felt before. True physical exhaustion. Genuine vulnerability. The absolute certainty that he could be killed and would stay dead. It was the most liberating thing he'd ever experienced. Okay, he said finally, letting Clark help him to his feet. Okay. I'm mortal. Now what? Now. Batman actually smiled. It was small, but it was there. Now you figure out who Q is when he's not omnipotent. You get a job. Pay rent. Experience human life. Learn what it means to matter without power. And we'll help, Diana said. You're not alone in this. You've proven you can be brave. Now prove you can be human. Q looked at the Justice League, these incredible beings who'd shown him more in a few days than the continuum had taught him in eons, and felt something unprecedented in his chest. His new human heart, beating with genuine emotion. Gratitude. Hope. Fear. Excitement. All of it real. All of it earned. All of it his. All right then, Q said, his voice stronger now. Teach me. Show me what it means to be human. I'm ready to learn. And for the first time in 10 billion years, he truly meant it. Struggling, who showed genuine promise. When the last student left, Clark Kent appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with an easy smile. Professor Q, he said. How's the teaching life? Exhausting, Q admitted, gathering his papers. How do you do this? Maintain a secret identity, save the world, and still show up for work the next day? Practice. Also, I don't need as much sleep as you do. Clark walked into the classroom. I wanted to check in. See how you're adjusting. Still alive. Still mortal. Still occasionally terrified by the fragility of human existence. Q packed his briefcase, an actual briefcase he'd purchased at a department store, which had been its own adventure. But also, good. Better than good, actually. Is it normal to feel this satisfied by something as simple as teaching undergraduates about epistemology? Very normal. Clark glanced at the whiteboard, at Q's notes about observer-dependent reality. You're making a difference. Maybe not on the scale you used to, but in a way that matters more. Because it's personal, Q said, understanding. Each of those students is a person, not an abstract concept. When I help them understand something, it changes them. Creates ripples I'll never fully see. He smiled. The continuum would find that horrifyingly inefficient. Good thing you left them behind. They walked out together, into the afternoon sunlight. Campus was alive with activity, students studying on the lawn, pick-up games of frisbee, a protest about dining hall food quality. Normal collegiate chaos. Q's phone buzzed. He pulled it out, still marveling that he needed a device to communicate now, and saw a message from Diana, training session tomorrow at 9 a.m. Don't be late. She's relentless, Q said, showing Clark the message. She wants to make sure you can defend yourself. You insisted on staying in Metropolis despite the high villain activity. 6 months later, Q stood in front of a classroom at Metropolis Community College, holding a piece of chalk and wondering how his life had come to this. So, he said to the 30 undergraduate students staring at him with varying degrees of attention, who can tell me the fundamental paradox of observer-dependent reality? A hand went up, Jenny, the philosophy major who actually did the readings. If observation affects outcome, how can we know anything about unobserved reality? Excellent. Q wrote the question on the board. His handwriting was terrible. 6 months of being human and he still couldn't master basic penmanship. And the answer is... We can't, interrupted Marcus, the engineering student who loved to argue. We can only know what we observe, which means reality is functionally subjective. Close, but not quite. Q turned back to the class. The answer is, it doesn't matter. Reality exists whether we observe it or not. What changes is our relationship to it. Our understanding. Our ability to interact meaningfully with existence. He set down the chalk. This is what I've learned in the past 6 months. Observation doesn't create reality, it creates meaning. The students dutifully took notes. Q watched them, these young humans who had no idea their professor had once been an omnipotent being from another universe, and felt something he'd grown to recognize as contentment. His life now was absurdly ordinary. He taught introduction to philosophy 3 days a week. He had office hours where students complained about grades. He lived in his modest apartment and paid rent with an actual salary. He bought groceries. Did laundry. Experienced the mundane frustrations of traffic, bad weather, and neighbors who played music too loud. It was wonderful. The class ended. Students filed out, most already focused on their phones, a few stopping to ask questions about the upcoming midterm. Q answered patiently, making notes about who needed extra help, who was. I like it here. Q pocketed his phone. Besides, I've gotten better. Last week I actually landed a hit on Batman during sparring. He let you. I know. But I'm choosing to interpret it as progress. They reached the parking lot. Q had bought a used car, a deeply humbling experience that had taught him more about human commerce than 1,000 observations from omnipotent detachment. It was a reliable sedan, 12 years old, with a slightly concerning noise from the engine that the mechanic kept saying was, probably fine. "I have something for you," Clark said, pulling an envelope from his jacket. "From the League. Officially unofficial." Q opened it. Inside was an ID card with his photo. He still looked like he had in his Starfleet uniform days, though now with slightly more gray at the temples, and a designation, Justice League Consultant, Philosophy and Dimensional Affairs. "We figured," Clark said, "that even though you're mortal now, your knowledge of other realities and omnipotent beings might occasionally be useful. If you're interested." Q stared at the card. "You're giving me a job. With the League?" "More like asking you to be available when we face something from your area of expertise. No combat. No fieldwork unless you specifically volunteer. Just, consultation. Advice when we encounter beings or phenomena you understand better than we do. But I'm mortal now. Vulnerable. Putting me near cosmic threats seems." "Your choice," Superman interrupted gently. "That's the point. We're not commanding you. We're offering. You can say no. You can maintain your nice, safe, ordinary human life teaching philosophy. No one would blame you." Q looked at the card again. Then at Clark. Then at the campus around him, the safe, academic bubble he'd built for himself over 6 months of learning to be human. "When do I start?" he asked. Clark's smile widened. "There's actually something coming up. Next week. Remember Darkseid?" Q's expression darkened. "The tyrant who manipulated my arrival to test his theories about attachment?" "Yes, I recall him vividly. He's back. Making moves in the Apocalypse sector. And he's been asking about you. Specifically, he wants to know if your choice to become mortal affected your universe of origin. If the Q continuum has responded to your decision." "They haven't," Q said immediately. "I'd know. Even mortal, I'd feel it if the continuum was paying attention to this universe." He paused. "But Darkseid doesn't know that. He's probing. Trying to understand if my transformation represents a vulnerability he can exploit. That's what Batman thought. We could use your insight on how omnipotent beings think. How to anticipate Darkseid's next move." Q considered. 6 months ago, he would have been terrified by this request. Facing down a new god as a mortal human? Suicidal. But now he understood something fundamental. Courage wasn't about being unafraid. It was about being terrified and choosing to act anyway. "I'll help," Q said. "On one condition." "Name it." "If things go badly, if Darkseid targets me specifically to prove a point about mortality, you don't blame yourself. You don't let my potential death become a lesson in why mortals shouldn't face gods. Sometimes we face gods anyway. That's what makes us human." Clark was quiet for a moment. Then he extended his hand. "Deal." They shook on it. Two beings from different universes, one who'd chosen to become less and one who'd never been more than himself, united in the simple agreement that doing the right thing mattered more than survival. The strategy session in the Watchtower 3 days later involved the full League, several specialists. Community, and Q sitting at the conference table trying not to be overwhelmed by the fact that he was genuinely contributing. "Darkseid's pattern suggests he's building towards something larger," Batman said, displays showing troop movements on Apocalypse. "Increased activity in dimensional research. Raids on planets with unique metaphysical properties. He's gathering data. For the anti-life equation," Q said. Everyone turned to him. That's always his endgame. He's trying to prove that free will is an illusion. That all choice reduces to deterministic self-interest. He stood, moving to the display. When I was omnipotent, he saw me as a threat to that theory. But now that I've chosen mortality, I'm evidence for it. In his mind, I reduced myself to prove something to beings I'd previously considered beneath notice. That's not altruism, it's self-interested desire for validation. Is he right? Flash asked. Q thought about it. Really thought about it. Maybe partially. I did want validation. I wanted to matter to beings I found interesting. But that's not the whole truth. I chose mortality because I'd grown tired of existing without consequences. Because I wanted meaning more than I wanted power. He looked at Barry. You understand this. You broke the timeline trying to save your mother. Self-interested? Yes. But also love. Also connection. Also the fundamentally human refusal to accept that caring for others is weakness. So how do we use that against Darkseid? Diana asked. We prove that choice can't be reduced to math. Q pulled up a holographic representation of the anti-life equation, the mathematical proof Darkseid was obsessed with completing. He's trying to account for every variable. Every factor that influences decision-making. But he's missing the fundamental element that makes choice real, novelty. The capacity to surprise even yourself. To act in ways that contradict your own patterns because in that moment, you decided to be different. That's not a strategy, Hal said. That's philosophy. Philosophy is the strategy, Q insisted. Darkseid is vulnerable to genuine surprise. To actions that don't fit his calculations. The reason I terrified him when I was omnipotent wasn't my power, it was my unpredictability. The possibility that I might do something he hadn't accounted for. Batman leaned back, thinking. So we don't fight him with power. We fight him with chaos. Unpredictability. Choices that break his equations. Exactly. Q smiled. Welcome to advanced philosophy. It turns out the best weapon against someone trying to prove free will doesn't exist is to exercise free will in ways they can't predict. This is why we brought you in, Superman said. Not for your power, but for your perspective. The planning continued for hours. Q contributed where he could, insights into omnipotent psychology, suggestions for how to disrupt deterministic calculations, warnings about the dangers of engaging with beings who saw mortals as variables to be solved. When the session ended, Q returned to Earth via transport tube, back to his apartment in Metropolis. His cat, a tabby named Schrödinger, because of course, greeted him at the door, demanding dinner with typical feline urgency. Yes, I know, Q said, opening a can of food. Your needs are paramount. Forget saving the universe from tyrannical new gods. The cat must be fed. Schrödinger purred, completely unimpressed by cosmic drama. Q had adopted the cat 3 months into his mortality, when the loneliness of being human had become almost overwhelming. The continuum had been distant and cold, yes, but at least he'd had other Q to occasionally interact with. As a mortal human, he'd initially had no one. The cat had helped. So had his students. His friendship with Clark and Barry and the others. The weekly D&D game he'd joined with other faculty members, where he played a wizard and pretended he didn't remember what actual omnipotence felt like. Slowly, methodically, he'd built a life. A real life. One where his choices mattered because they affected real people in real ways. His phone buzzed. A text from Jenny, his philosophy student. Professor Q, I've been thinking about what you said in class. About observation creating meaning rather than reality. Does that mean we're responsible for finding meaning in suffering? Or does suffering have inherent meaning we discover? Q smiled and typed back, come to office hours tomorrow. That's a conversation worth having in person. This was his life now. Teaching. Consulting. Existing within human limitations and finding those limitations more freeing than any omnipotence he'd ever possessed. The continuum would call it madness. Reducing oneself voluntarily, accepting mortality, embracing the painful uncertainty of linear existence. But Q had learned something the continuum never could, meaning didn't come from power. It came from connection. From caring about something enough that losing it would hurt. From choosing every day to participate in a reality that would eventually end, because that ending made every moment precious. He looked out his apartment window at Metropolis, the city Superman protected, the place he now called home, and thought about the upcoming confrontation with Darkseid. As a mortal, he might die. Conclusion. Q's journey from omnipotent observer to mortal participant represents something profound, the recognition that power without purpose is just noise. In choosing to become human, fully, completely, irreversibly, he didn't lose himself. He found himself. The DC Universe, with its impossible heroes and their equally impossible dedication to hope, taught an immortal being what the Q continuum never could. That meaning comes not from controlling reality but from participating in it. That vulnerability isn't weakness but the foundation of genuine connection. That mortality, far from being a limitation, is what makes every choice matter. 6 months into his new life, Q had become something the continuum would never understand, genuinely happy. Not the detached amusement of an omnipotent observer, but the complex, messy satisfaction of a being who'd chosen to care about something beyond himself. His students learned philosophy. His colleagues learned patience with his occasional social missteps. The Justice League learned that even former gods could grow. And Q learned what it meant to matter not because of what you could do, but because of who you chose to be. When Darkseid eventually came, and he would come, because tyrants always do, Q would face him not as an omnipotent rival but as a mortal man who'd learned something more valuable than power, that living with consequence, choosing despite uncertainty, and caring despite inevitable loss was the truest form of strength. The Q continuum had existed for eons without purpose. Q had found his in 80 years or less. And that made all the difference. May the Force be with you. More stories await.